Imagine this. You're at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, surrounded by the hustle and energy of the busiest terminal in America. Your flight is moments away, everything is in order, or so you think. Suddenly, you're pulled aside, your ticket checks out, your ID is valid, but they say, you don't belong here. What happens next will leave you speechless. You won't want to miss this. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story of justice, resilience, and bravery resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell for more powerful stories like this. This is the story of Colonel Serena Monroe, a trailblazing woman in the U.S. Marine Corps, as she faced a moment that tested her composure, her resolve, and everything she stood for. Serena strolled through the terminal with a quiet but commanding air, her dark curls tucked neatly beneath a baseball cap that bore the logo of her alma mater, Spelman College. She wore a cropped black leather jacket over a fitted burgundy sweater and dark jeans, blending effortlessly with the bustling crowd around her. It was a busy Friday morning in Atlanta, and the hum of the city seemed to seep into every corner of the airport. Serena wasn't dressed for attention. In fact, she had chosen her civilian attire intentionally, hoping to avoid the stares and questions that her military uniform often brought. At 38, she had achieved what few women, let alone black women, had. As a colonel in the Marine Corps, her life was defined by discipline, perseverance, and breaking barriers. Today, she was heading to a diversity and leadership summit in Richmond, Virginia, a trip that held significant importance for her career and her mission to bring inclusivity to the military. Adjusting the strap of her olive green duffel bag, she glanced at her phone to check the time. She had made it to the gate with plenty of time to spare, but her thoughts were already miles ahead, focused on the speech she was preparing to deliver. It wasn't just another event. It was an opportunity to influence minds, challenge norms, and advocate for the changes she had fought for throughout her career. As she queued up to board her first-class seat, Serena felt the weight of someone's eyes on her. She was no stranger to the occasional curious glance, but this was different, sharper, more scrutinizing. Her gaze shifted to the gate agent, a petite woman with a severe bob and a stiff smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ma'am," the gate agent called out as Serena handed over her ticket. Her voice carried a note of skepticism that made Serena's stomach tighten. "Are you sure you're in the right line? This is for first-class passengers." Serena paused, her grip on the ticket tightening. She had heard those words before in various forms, with varying degrees of condescension. Each time, they stung just as deeply. She straightened her posture, standing taller than ever. "Yes, I'm sure." The agent's smile faltered as she scanned the ticket, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I'll need to see your ID," she said. Serena handed over her ID without a word, her expression calm, but her pulse quickening. The gate agent scrutinized the document for longer than necessary, her eyes flicking between the card and Serena's face, as if searching for discrepancies. "I'll have to check with my supervisor," the agent finally said, her tone clipped. Serena's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She watched as the agent stepped away, her ID still in hand. Serena could feel the eyes of the other passengers boring into her, the weight of their curiosity like a spotlight. Her mind raced, memories of similar moments flashing before her, times when she had been forced to prove herself in ways her white or male colleagues never had to. The minutes ticked by, and the irritation in the pit of Serena's stomach began to bubble into anger. She glanced at the digital clock on the wall. Time was slipping away, and she couldn't afford to miss this flight. Not this one. When the gate agent returned, she wasn't alone. A security officer flanked her, his expression unreadable, but his presence unmistakably authoritative. "Ma'am," the officer began, his voice neutral but firm, "we need to verify your credentials." The words sent a jolt through Serena, though she maintained her composure. She handed over her military ID once again, her voice steady. "I'm Colonel Serena Monroe, United States Marine Corps. I'm heading to Richmond for a military summit. My documents are in order." The officer examined the ID closely, his brow furrowing slightly. Serena could see the doubt in his eyes, and it only fueled her determination. She had faced this kind of skepticism her entire life, from peers, from superiors, and now from strangers who had no idea who she was or what she had accomplished. "Wait here," the officer said, stepping aside to confer with the gate agent. Serena stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an insult. Her credentials were clear, her ticket was valid, and yet she was being treated as if she didn't belong, as if someone like her couldn't possibly hold the rank she did or sit in first class. The murmurs of the surrounding passengers grew louder, and Serena caught snippets of their conversations. What's going on? Why is she being held up? Did something happen? Serena closed her eyes briefly, willing herself to stay calm. She had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to let this moment define her. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, her patience began to fray. "Ma'am," the officer said as he returned, his tone still measured but now tinged with uncertainty. "Can you step aside with us for further clarification?" Serena didn't move. She remained firmly planted, her chin lifting slightly as she met the officer's gaze. "No," she said evenly. "I've shown you my identification and my boarding pass. I've complied with everything you've asked, and now I'm being delayed for no valid reason. This is unacceptable." Her voice, though calm, carried the unmistakable authority of a leader accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. A few passengers nearby paused, their curiosity shifting into concern. A middle-aged woman seated by the gate gave Serena an encouraging nod, silently acknowledging the injustice unfolding before them. The officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for her resistance. He glanced at the gate agent, who looked equally uncertain. "Ma'am, we just need to be cautious," the officer said, his words faltering. "You understand, don't you?" "Cautious of what?" Serena countered, her voice still steady but sharp enough to cut through the noise of the bustling terminal. "I've provided my credentials. What more do you need?" The officer hesitated, then gestured toward a side area near the gate. "If you could just step over here while we sort this out." "No," Serena said again, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You're questioning me because you can't reconcile who I am with what you think I should look like. Let me be clear, I will not step aside. I will not be treated differently because of your assumptions." The firmness in her voice silenced the surrounding chatter. More passengers turned to watch, their expressions a mixture of confusion and discomfort. The tension in the air was palpable, and Serena could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She wasn't just standing her ground for herself. She was standing for every person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. The gate agent whispered something to the officer, who then pulled out a radio and began speaking into it. Serena caught fragments of the conversation: verification, escalation, situation at gate 22. Her frustration mounted with each word, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she folded her arms across her chest, her posture radiating unshakable confidence. As the minutes dragged on, Serena's thoughts turned to her speech, the summit, and the stakes of the moment. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was about to address an audience of military leaders on the importance of diversity and inclusion, and here she was, being questioned simply because she didn't fit the image these gatekeepers had in mind. Finally, a supervisor arrived, a tall man in a dark suit with an air of authority. His eyes flicked to Serena, then to the officer and gate agent. "What's the issue here?" he asked, his tone brisk. "She's claiming to be a colonel in the Marine Corps," the gate agent said, her voice lower now, tinged with defensiveness. "We're just verifying her credentials." The supervisor's brow furrowed as he turned to Serena. "May I see your ID, ma'am?" Serena handed over her military ID once again, her jaw tightening as the supervisor examined it. Unlike the others, he seemed to recognize the gravity of the situation almost immediately. His expression softened, and he handed the ID back to her with a nod. "Colonel Monroe, I apologize for the inconvenience. You're cleared aboard." The gate agent's face flushed, but she said nothing. The officer stepped back, clearly unsure of how to handle the sudden shift in authority. Serena, however, wasn't ready to let it go. "This isn't just an inconvenience," she said, her voice measured but firm. "This is about the assumptions you made based on my appearance. I shouldn't have to prove myself over and over again just to board a flight. You need to do better." The supervisor nodded again, his expression serious. "You're absolutely right, Colonel. I'll make sure this is addressed." Without another word, Serena walked past the gate agent and the officer, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The eyes of the other passengers followed her as she made her way down the jet bridge, but she didn't look back. Her focus was already shifting to what lay ahead, to the summit, to her speech, and to the fight for change that she knew was far from over. As Serena settled into her seat in first class, she allowed herself a moment to exhale. The adrenaline from the confrontation still coursed through her veins, but she pushed it aside. She had faced battles far more challenging than this, and she wasn't about to let a moment of ignorance derail her mission. The plane began to taxi, and Serena gazed out the window, her reflection superimposed over the sprawling city below. She thought about Atlanta, the city that had shaped her resilience, her ambition, and her unwavering sense of purpose. It was the city where she had learned to fight for herself and others, and it was the city that fueled her resolve to keep going, no matter the obstacles. As the plane lifted off, Serena made a silent vow. The next time she faced a moment like this, and she knew there would be a next time, she would be ready, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated, doubted, or dismissed. This fight was far from over, but she was prepared to see it through. As the plane climbed into the clouds, Serena tried to center herself, leaning back into the plush, first-class seat. The other passengers seemed to have settled, but she couldn't ignore the occasional glances thrown her way. She knew what some of them were thinking, wondering what had just happened at the gate and why it had escalated so publicly. She couldn't help but recall the words of one of her mentors, a retired general who had told her early in her career, "You'll always have to be twice as good to get half the respect, but don't let it break you, let it sharpen you." Serena had clung to that advice through years of grueling training, deployments, and moments of blatant discrimination. Today had been no different. She'd had to steel herself against the assumptions and doubts of strangers, once again proving she deserved the respect she had already earned. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their cruising altitude and estimated arrival time in Richmond. Serena barely registered the words. Her mind was already at the summit, visualizing the room of high-ranking officials she was about to address. She could picture the rows of uniforms and polished shoes, the sharp, scrutinizing eyes of people who had spent decades shaping military policy. Her speech wasn't just about diversity. It was about dismantling the quiet but pervasive biases that held the institution back. And after what had just happened at the airport, her determination had only deepened. She opened her laptop and began reviewing her notes. The cabin was quiet except for the hum of the engines. As she scrolled through her bullet points, a young black flight attendant approached her, a soft smile on her face. "Colonel Monroe," the attendant said, her voice respectful but tinged with hesitation. "I just wanted to say thank you for standing your ground back there. We saw what happened and it's not right, but seeing you handle it, it was inspiring." Serena blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She wasn't used to being recognized or acknowledged outside of military circles, especially in moments like these. She offered the young woman a small smile, grateful for the kind words. "Thank you," Serena replied. "Sometimes you just have to stand firm, even when it feels like the whole world is against you." The flight attendant nodded, her smile widening. "Well, I'm rooting for you, ma'am. If you need anything, just let me know." As the attendant walked away, Serena felt a flicker of hope. Moments like these reminded her why she fought so hard, not just for herself, but for others who looked up to her, who saw in her a reflection of what they could achieve despite the barriers. The rest of the flight passed uneventfully, though Serena remained restless. Her thoughts kept circling back to the confrontation at the gate. She hated how easily it could have derailed her day, her focus, her confidence. But she also knew that this was exactly why her voice was needed. The struggles she faced weren't unique to her. They were part of a larger pattern, one that needed to be broken. When the plane touched down in Richmond, Serena felt a renewed sense of purpose. She stepped off the jet bridge, her boots clicking against the polished floors of the terminal. The cold air hit her as she exited the airport, a stark contrast to Atlanta's warmth, but she welcomed it. It cleared her mind, sharpening her resolve as she headed toward the car, waiting to take her to the summit venue. The drive through Richmond was peaceful, the historic architecture and tree-lined streets providing a calming backdrop. Serena's phone buzzed repeatedly with notifications, but she ignored them for now. She knew the airport incident had likely drawn attention, possibly even gone viral, but she wasn't ready to confront that yet. Her focus was on the summit. The venue, a grand historic hotel in the heart of downtown Richmond, came into view. The large, stately building exuded both charm and authority, a fitting location for a gathering of military leaders. Serena stepped out of the car, pulling her duffel bag over her shoulder. The valet greeted her warmly, and she nodded in acknowledgement as she made her way inside. The conference room where the summit was held was already buzzing with activity. Uniformed officers mingled with civilian experts, their conversations a low hum that filled the space. Serena spotted a few familiar faces, colleagues she respected, and allies who had supported her efforts over the years. They waved her over, their smiles warm but tinged with curiosity. "Serena," one of them, Colonel David Hargrove, said as she approached. "We heard about the incident at the airport. Are you okay?" Serena gave a short nod. "I'm fine, David. Just another day in the life, you know?" David frowned, his salt and pepper hair catching the overhead lights. "It's not right. You shouldn't have to deal with that. None of us should. If there's anything I can do—" "Thanks," Serena cut in gently. "But I've got it under control. Let's focus on the summit. There's work to be done." The room began to quiet as the first speaker took the podium. Serena found her seat, her speech tucked neatly into a folder in front of her. As the summit progressed, she listened intently to the discussions on leadership, innovation, and the future of the military. But as the hours passed, she couldn't shake the weight of what had happened that morning. It wasn't just a personal affront. It was a reminder of the larger fight she was waging. When her turn came to speak, Serena walked to the podium with the same quiet confidence she carried through every challenge. She adjusted the microphone and scanned the room, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice strong and clear. "Today, we're here to talk about the future of our military, the policies, innovations, and leadership strategies that will carry us forward. But I want to start by addressing something that is often overlooked in these discussions: the human element. Specifically, the biases that shape how we see each other, and by extension, how we lead." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. "This morning," she continued, "I was reminded of just how deeply those biases can run. Despite my rank, my credentials, and my service, I was stopped, questioned, and delayed at an airport gate because I didn't fit someone's idea of what a colonel should look like. It wasn't the first time, and I doubt it will be the last. But it was a stark reminder of why this conversation about diversity, inclusion, and equity is so critical." Serena's voice didn't waver as she recounted the incident, choosing her words carefully, but not holding back. She saw heads nodding in agreement, faces tightening with understanding. For some in the room, her words were a wake-up call. For others, they were a painful reminder of their own experiences. "We cannot afford to let outdated assumptions dictate who belongs in our ranks, or who is deemed worthy of leadership," she said. "Our strength as a military lies in our diversity. It lies in our ability to see past superficial differences and recognize the potential, the talent, and the value that each individual brings to the table." She paused, letting her words sink in. The room remained silent, the weight of her message palpable. "This is not just about representation," she concluded. "It's about transformation. It's about building a military and a society that truly reflects the values we claim to uphold. And that starts with us, here, today." The room erupted in applause, some standing as they clapped. Serena stepped back from the podium, her heart pounding, but her resolve unwavering. She had said what needed to be said, and she could feel the impact of her words in the energy of the room. As she returned to her seat, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for equality was far from over, but moments like this reminded her why it was worth it. And as she glanced around the room, she knew she wasn't fighting alone. As the applause subsided and the next speaker approached the podium, Serena allowed herself a moment to reflect. She'd felt the weight of the room during her speech the way her words had resonated, rippling through the audience like a stone dropped in still water. For years, she had fought to have these conversations, pushing through resistance and silence. Today, it felt like the tide might finally be turning. After the session ended, several attendees approached Serena, their expressions a mix of respect and gratitude. A young lieutenant with bright eyes and a nervous smile was the first to speak. "Colonel Monroe," she said, her voice almost trembling, "I just wanted to thank you for what you said. Hearing someone like you talk about these issues, it means so much. I've struggled with some of the same challenges, and it's inspiring to see someone who's not afraid to call them out." Serena smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on the lieutenant's shoulder. "Thank you, and remember, you're not alone in this. The path isn't easy, but it's worth it. Keep pushing forward." As the young officer walked away, a senior general, his uniform adorned with medals, approached Serena. His presence commanded attention, and the surrounding conversations quieted as he stopped in front of her. "Colonel Monroe," he said, his tone serious, "I've been in this business for over 30 years, and I can tell you your words today were powerful. They were necessary. I've seen too many good people overlooked because of biases we don't like to admit exist. It's about time someone said it out loud." "Thank you, General," Serena replied, her voice steady. "But this can't just be about words. We need action. Systemic change doesn't come easy, and it doesn't come quickly, but it has to start somewhere." The general nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. If there's anything I can do to support your efforts, let me know." Serena felt a flicker of hope. Moments like this, where the right people recognize the need for change, gave her strength to keep going. But she also knew that promises, no matter how well-intentioned, needed follow-through. As the evening unfolded, Serena found herself in deeper conversations with attendees who wanted to brainstorm actionable steps. Some were small, like revisiting bias training programs, while others aimed higher, calling for structural overhauls to recruitment and leadership development. Serena took it all in, mentally cataloging ideas and allies for the fight ahead. Later, as the summit wrapped up and attendees began to trickle out, Serena lingered in the room, her thoughts swirling. The day had been productive, but she couldn't shake the lingering frustration from that morning's incident at the airport. It wasn't just about her, it was about the larger systemic issues that allowed such moments to happen repeatedly. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw dozens of notifications, texts, emails, and social media alerts. With a resigned sigh, she unlocked her phone, preparing herself for what she might find. The videos from the airport had indeed gone viral. Clips of her calm but firm responses to the gate agent and the security officer were circulating across platforms, accompanied by hashtags like #Colonel Monroe and #Diversity in Leadership. The comments were a mix of outrage at the treatment she'd received, admiration for her composure, and demands for accountability. Serena scrolled through the posts, her emotions a mix of exhaustion and resolve. She hadn't asked for this attention, but she knew she couldn't ignore it either. This was an opportunity to amplify the message she had spent her career championing. One post caught her eye, a tweet from a young woman in Atlanta. "Colonel Monroe, you're a hero. What you face today is what so many of us deal with every day, just trying to exist in spaces that weren't built for us. Thank you for showing us how to stand tall." Serena stared at the words, a lump forming in her throat. She had always known her work was bigger than herself, but moments like this brought that reality into sharp focus. This wasn't just about her journey, it was about paving the way for others. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call. The number was unfamiliar, but something told her to answer. "Hello? Colonel Monroe?" the voice on the other end said. "This is Diana Carter with the Atlanta Tribune. We saw the videos from the airport and your speech at the summit today. Would you be willing to share your story with us? I think it could inspire a lot of people." Serena hesitated, her mind racing. She wasn't sure if she was ready to step into the spotlight on such a public stage. But then she thought of the young lieutenant, the tweet, and the countless others who might see themselves in her story. Maybe this wasn't just about her anymore. "All right," she said finally, "let's talk." Over the next few days, Serena's story spread far and wide. Interviews with local and national outlets highlighted her experience at the airport. But Serena made sure the focus wasn't just on her. She used every platform to address the broader issue's systemic biases, the need for diversity in leadership, and the importance of creating equitable spaces for all. Her voice became a rallying cry, resonating with people across the country and beyond. Civil rights organizations reached out, inviting her to speak at their events. Military leaders began citing her speech in discussions about policy reforms. And everyday people, teachers, students, professionals sent her messages of support, sharing their own stories of resilience and struggle. But with the attention came challenges. Critics emerged, questioning her motives and accusing her of exaggerating the incident for attention. Serena ignored the noise, focusing instead on the overwhelming support and the tangible impact she was beginning to see. One evening, as she sat in her hotel room, preparing for yet another interview, Serena received a call from an old friend, Major Lisa Bennett, one of her closest allies during her early days in the Marines. "Serena," Lisa said, her voice warm but concerned, How are you holding up? I'm managing, Serena replied. It's been a whirlwind, but I feel like this is important, like I have to keep pushing. You do, Lisa agreed. But don't forget to take care of yourself, too. You can't pour from an empty cup. Serena nodded, even though Lisa couldn't see her. I hear you. I'll try. As she hung up, Serena leaned back in her chair, her mind racing with everything that had happened over the past few days. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. This was only the beginning. As the days turned into weeks, Serena's life took on a new rhythm, one she hadn't entirely anticipated. The whirlwind of interviews, speaking engagements, and panel discussions had thrust her into a spotlight she wasn't entirely comfortable with, but knew she had to embrace. Every event, every platform she stepped onto, was an opportunity to address the systemic inequities she had spent her career fighting against. Back in Atlanta, Serena finally had a day to catch her breath. She had returned home late the previous night, her duffel bag still resting by the door. The familiarity of her cozy bungalow in the West End, a neighborhood rich in history and culture, brought her a sense of grounding she desperately needed. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as she sank into her favorite chair by the window, letting the morning light wash over her. Her phone buzzed on the side table, pulling her from her moment of peace. It was a text from her mentor, General Patrice Simmons, one of the few women of color to reach such a rank in the military. Patrice, saw your interview on CNN. You were incredible. Keep going. You're making waves. Serena smiled at the message, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. Patrice had been her rock during the most challenging times of her career, a voice of wisdom and encouragement when the weight of the world felt unbearable. She typed back a quick response. Serena, thanks, General. Trying my best to keep the momentum going. The truth was, as fulfilling as this work was, it was also exhausting. The constant travel, the scrutiny, the pressure to always say the right thing, it was a lot to carry. But the messages from strangers and the stories they shared reminded her why she couldn't stop now. Later that day, Serena met with her longtime friend and confidant, Nia, at Busy Bee Cafe, a soul food institution in Atlanta. The restaurant was buzzing with its usual lunchtime crowd, the smell of fried chicken and cornbread wafting through the air. As they slid into a booth near the back, Serena felt a rare sense of normalcy. You've been busy, Nia said, raising an eyebrow as she sipped her sweet tea. Every time I turn on the TV, there you are. Serena laughed softly. Tell me about it. It's been a lot, but it feels like people are finally listening. Nia leaned forward, her expression serious. They are. And that's a big deal, Serena. What you're doing, it's not just about you. It's about all of us. You're giving people hope. Serena nodded, letting the words sink in. She hadn't fully realized just how much her voice meant to others until recently. The weight of that responsibility was both empowering and daunting. But you have to take care of yourself, too, Nia continued, her tone softening. You can't fight every battle on your own. I know, Serena admitted, but it's hard to slow down when there's so much work to do. Every time I think about taking a break, I remember someone's story, a young officer struggling to be seen, a civilian fighting for respect at their job, and I feel like I can't stop. Nia reached across the table, placing a hand on Serena's. You're human, Serena. You're allowed to rest. The fight will still be there when you're ready. Serena smiled gratefully, the warmth of Nia's support easing some of the tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. As the afternoon wore on, Serena and Nia reminisced about their college days at Spelman, laughing over memories of late-night study sessions and impromptu road trips. For a few hours, Serena was able to forget the weight of her new reality and simply enjoy the comfort of friendship. But the moment of respite was short-lived. That evening, Serena received a call that would thrust her into yet another high-stakes situation. Colonel Monroe, said the voice on the other end, this is Major General Anthony Price. I'm reaching out about a task force we're putting together. We need someone with your experience and insight. Serena's brow furrowed. What kind of task force, sir? One focused on addressing systemic bias and discrimination within the military, General Price explained. Your recent speeches and the attention your story has garnered have highlighted the need for immediate action. We want you to be part of shaping that change. Serena's heart skipped a beat. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she had been fighting for a chance to create tangible, institutional change from the inside. But it also meant stepping even further into the public eye and taking on an even greater workload. "I'm honored, sir," Serena said after a pause, "but I'll need some time to consider." "Of course," General Price replied. "Take the weekend, but we could really use your voice and leadership on this." As the call ended, Serena sat in silence, staring out the window at the Atlanta skyline. The weight of the decision pressed down on her. Joining the task force could be a game changer, but it would also mean putting herself under even greater scrutiny. She thought about everything she had already endured, every battle fought, every barrier broken. And she thought about the people she was fighting for, the ones who had reached out to her with words of encouragement and gratitude. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Serena had made her decision. Serena woke early the next morning, the pale light of dawn streaming through her bedroom window. She had always been an early riser, a habit honed during her years of military training, but today felt different. Her mind was clear, her purpose sharpened. By the time the sun fully illuminated the Atlanta skyline, she had already made her choice. Pulling out her phone, she dialed General Price's number. He answered on the second ring. "General Price, this is Colonel Monroe," she said, her voice steady. "I've thought it over. Count me in." The general's voice lit up with enthusiasm. "That's excellent news, Colonel. I'll send over the preliminary documents today. Our first meeting will be virtual to accommodate everyone, but we're aiming for an in-person strategy session in Washington next month. I'll make sure you're fully briefed." "Thank you, sir," Serena replied. "I'm ready to contribute however I can." After ending the call, Serena felt a mixture of anticipation and gravity. This wasn't just another role. It was a chance to shape the military's future, to dismantle the biases and barriers that had stood unchallenged for too long. The task force would be her battlefield, and she was determined to fight with everything she had. Over the next few weeks, Serena's schedule grew even more demanding. Between the task force meetings, public speaking engagements, and media appearances, she barely had time to catch her breath. Yet, the momentum of the movement she had inadvertently sparked carried her forward. Each meeting was an opportunity to push for systemic change, to ensure that the next generation of leaders wouldn't face the same obstacles she had. One of the first virtual task force meetings set the tone for what Serena knew would be a challenging but rewarding mission. The members included high-ranking officers from various branches of the military, civilian experts on diversity and inclusion, and representatives from advocacy organizations. Serena's introduction to the group was met with respectful nods and genuine curiosity. "Colonel Monroe," General Price began, "your perspective and experiences will be invaluable to this effort. We're here to confront the issues that have lingered for far too long, and I'm counting on all of you to approach this with honesty and urgency." Serena leaned forward, her gaze steady. "We're not here to make minor adjustments," she said, her voice cutting through the virtual room like a blade. "We're here to overhaul a system that has been resistant to change for decades. This won't be comfortable, but it will be necessary." There was a pause as the other members absorbed her words. Then, one by one, they began to voice their agreement, their determination matching her own. The conversation turned to actionable goals, reviewing recruitment practices, examining promotion criteria, and addressing the culture of silence around discrimination. By the time the meeting ended, Serena felt a glimmer of hope. The task force was still in its infancy, but the seeds of progress had been planted. Outside of her official duties, Serena continued to engage with the community that had rallied around her. Social media had become an unexpected tool in her arsenal, allowing her to connect with people from all walks of life. Her inbox was flooded with messages, some from aspiring officers seeking guidance, others from civilians sharing their own stories of resilience. One evening, Serena came across a message that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a high school student in Savannah, Georgia. "Colonel Monroe, my name is Kayla. I'm 17, and I've always dreamed of joining the Marines. But people keep telling me I won't make it because I'm a girl and I'm black. Watching you on TV made me think maybe they're wrong. Do you have any advice for someone like me?" Serena's heart swelled as she read the words. She thought back to her own teenage years, to the doubts and obstacles she had faced. This was why she did what she did, so young women like Kayla could see that their dreams were valid, their ambitions worth pursuing. She replied carefully, pouring her heart into every word. "Kayla, Don't ever let anyone tell you what you can or can't achieve. The road won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Find your strength, hold on to your vision, and don't let go. I believe in you, and I know you can do this. After hitting send, Serena sat back, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. If she could inspire just one person to push past their limits, it would all be worth it. As the months passed, Serena's work with the task force began to yield tangible results. Policies were proposed to address biases in recruitment and leadership pipelines, while training programs were revamped to include comprehensive education on unconscious bias and cultural competency. Resistance from certain corners of the military was inevitable, but Serena faced it head-on, her resolve unshaken. Her story continued to resonate far beyond the confines of the military. Civil rights organizations invited her to speak at their events, universities requested her as a guest lecturer, and her growing influence even caught the attention of lawmakers. Serena found herself at the center of a national conversation about race, gender, and leadership, a position she had never sought but now fully embraced. One crisp fall morning, Serena returned to Spelman College, invited to deliver a keynote address to students and alumni. Standing on the stage of Sisters Chapel, she looked out at the sea of faces, young women who reminded her of herself, full of potential and determination. "Your dreams are valid," she told them, her voice carrying through the hallowed space. "Your voice matters, and the obstacles you face while daunting can be overcome. If I've learned anything, it's that the fight for justice and equality is never easy, but it is always worth it." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing in the hearts of everyone present. Serena knew that her journey was far from over, but in that moment, she felt a deep sense of purpose. As she stepped off the stage, a young woman approached her, tears glistening in her eyes. "Colonel Monroe," she said, her voice trembling, "you've given me hope." "Thank you," Serena smiled, placing a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "You already have everything you need to succeed," she said. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As she walked back to her car, the Atlanta skyline stretched out before her, Serena felt the weight of her journey and the hope of what lay ahead. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. For herself, for the Kaylas of the world, and for every voice that had ever been silenced, she would keep going. She was Serena Monroe, a colonel, a leader, and a force for change. As Serena drove home from her keynote at Spelman, the golden hues of the setting sun bathed Atlanta in warmth, and the city buzzed with its familiar energy. She felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The keynote had been powerful, and the feedback she received afterward reinforced her belief that her voice mattered more now than ever. But she knew her work was far from over. Her phone buzzed as she pulled into her driveway. It was an email from General Price with an attachment labeled Task Force Report Draft. Serena quickly scanned the email. The task force had made significant progress over the past few months, and the report outlined recommendations for systemic changes in the military. The upcoming in-person strategy session in Washington would determine how to present these findings to the top brass and lawmakers. Serena poured herself a cup of herbal tea and settled into her favorite chair. She opened the document, her eyes scanning the first few pages. The report highlighted the core issues they had discussed: recruitment disparities, unequal promotions pathways, and the need for comprehensive training programs to address bias. Each recommendation was backed by data and real-world examples, many of which resonated deeply with Serena's personal experiences. She read late into the night, making notes and flagging areas where she felt the language needed to be more assertive. By the time she set her laptop aside, it was nearly midnight, and her thoughts were racing. The report was strong, but she knew presenting it to military leadership would be a battle. Change didn't come easily to institutions as deeply rooted as the armed forces. The following morning, Serena prepared for her trip to Washington. As she packed her bag, she couldn't help but think about how far she'd come, not just in her career, but in her journey to becoming a voice for change. Every setback, every confrontation, and every moment of doubt had led her here. The flight to D.C. was uneventful, but Serena's mind was anything but quiet. She mentally rehearsed her arguments, anticipating the pushback she might face during the meeting. When the plane landed at Reagan National Airport, she was met by a driver who whisked her to the Pentagon. The Pentagon's vast, imposing structure loomed ahead as Serena stepped out of the car. She adjusted her uniform, the insignia on her chest gleaming under the crisp morning light. This wasn't just another meeting. It was a pivotal moment in her mission to create lasting change. Inside, the atmosphere was charged. The task force members greeted one another with nods and handshakes, the weight of the day evident in their expressions. General Price called the meeting to order, his commanding presence setting the tone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today is about more than just presenting a report. It's about making a case for the future of our military, a future that reflects the diversity of the nation we serve. Colonel Monroe, I believe you wanted to address the room before we begin." Serena stood, her gaze sweeping over the room. She saw faces that ranged from supportive to skeptical, but she wasn't intimidated. She had faced far greater challenges than this. "Thank you, General Price," she said, her voice steady. "This report isn't just about identifying problems. It's about offering solutions. Solutions that will make our military stronger, more inclusive, and more representative of the values we claim to uphold. But let me be clear, these changes won't come without resistance. They will challenge deeply ingrained norms and require a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But if we are serious about leading the best and brightest, we cannot afford to ignore the barriers that prevent talented individuals from rising to their full potential." Her words hung in the air, the room silent as they absorbed her message. Serena took her seat, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. The discussion that followed was intense. Some leaders pushed back, arguing that the military had always been a meritocracy and that changes might disrupt tradition. Others, however, voiced strong support, sharing stories of their own struggles or those they had witnessed among their troops. When the meeting adjourned, Serena felt a mix of relief and determination. Progress had been made, but there was still a long road ahead. Back in Atlanta, Serena tried to return to her routine, but the momentum of her work made that nearly impossible. The recommendations from the task force began to gain traction, and Serena was asked to testify before Congress about the findings. The idea of speaking before lawmakers was daunting, but Serena knew the stakes were too high to pass up. On the day of the hearing, Serena stood in the packed chamber, her uniform crisp and her demeanor composed. Cameras clicked as she walked to her seat, the room buzzing with anticipation. "Colonel Monroe," the committee chair began, "thank you for joining us today. We've all seen your story, and we've read the task force's report. We're eager to hear your perspective." Serena took a deep breath, her voice unwavering as she began. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am here not just as a colonel in the United States Marine Corps, but as someone who has lived the challenges this report seeks to address. The recommendations we've outlined are not just theoretical, they are necessary. Without them, we risk losing talented individuals who could shape the future of our military." Her testimony was met with both praise and probing questions. Some lawmakers expressed concern about the feasibility of implementing such sweeping changes, but Serena countered with facts, data, and personal anecdotes that left little room for doubt. When the hearing concluded, Serena felt a sense of accomplishment. She had made her case, and she could see the impact her words had on those in the room. But she also knew this was just one step in a much larger battle. As the months passed, Serena's influence continued to grow. The policies she had advocated for began to take shape. And while progress was slow, it was steady. She became a sought-after speaker, not just in military circles, but in corporate and academic spaces as well. Her story was no longer just about her. It had become a symbol of resilience, leadership, and the fight for equity. One evening, as Serena walked through Centennial Olympic Park in downtown Atlanta, she reflected on how much her life had changed. The journey had been exhausting, but it was also deeply rewarding. She thought about the young women who had reached out to her, the allies she had gained, and the systemic changes she had helped initiate. The fight was far from over, but Serena knew one thing for certain. She would never stop pushing for a world where everyone, regardless of their background, could rise to their full potential. And as she gazed at the lights of the Atlanta skyline, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was ready for whatever came next. Serena's steps echoed softly in the quiet halls of her Atlanta bungalow later that evening. The stillness of the house was a stark contrast to the frenetic energy of her day-to-day life. She set down her bag, poured herself a glass of water, and settled on the couch, the hum of the city faint in the background. She had come far farther than she had ever imagined when she first put on her uniform, but the journey had been as much about internal growth as it had been about external success. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was an email from Kayla, the high school student from Savannah who had written to her weeks earlier. Colonel Monroe, thank you so much for replying to my message. I've been thinking a lot about your advice, and I decided to talk to my school counselor about joining ROTC. I was scared they'd laugh at me, but instead, they said they'd support me however they could. I think I can do this. Thank you for believing in me. Serena's heart swelled with pride. Moments like these, she thought, made all the battles worth it. She replied immediately, offering Kayla encouragement and a promise to stay in touch. The next morning, Serena awoke to an unexpected call from a national morning news show. They wanted her to appear for a special segment discussing her testimony before Congress and the broader implications of her work. The producer was insistent, emphasizing how much of a buzz her story continued to generate. Serena hesitated. She had never sought fame, and the constant media attention was starting to wear on her. But she also understood the importance of keeping these issues in the public eye. After a moment of deliberation, she agreed. 2 days later, Serena found herself sitting in a sleek, brightly lit studio in Midtown Atlanta. The anchor, a charismatic woman named Bianca Martin, greeted her warmly. Colonel Monroe, Bianca began as the cameras rolled, your story has resonated with so many people, not just within the military but across the country. Why do you think your message has struck such a chord? Serena took a moment to gather her thoughts. I think it's because my story, while personal, reflects a much larger truth. People recognize the challenges I've faced because they've faced similar ones in their own lives. Whether it's in the workplace, in schools, or in their communities, they've experienced the sting of being underestimated or excluded. What we're talking about isn't just about the military. It's about creating a culture where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. Bianca nodded, her expression thoughtful. And yet, we've seen some pushback against the changes you're advocating for. What do you say to those who believe these efforts might disrupt the traditions of the military? Serena's gaze was steady. Tradition has its place, but we can't let it become an excuse for stagnation. The world is evolving, and the military must evolve with it. Our strength lies in our adaptability, in our ability to lead by example. Inclusivity and equity are not threats to tradition, they are enhancements to it. They ensure that we are truly reflecting the values we claim to defend. The segment aired the following morning, and the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from viewers, many expressing their support and sharing their own stories of adversity. Serena was moved by the outpouring of solidarity, but also keenly aware of the responsibility that came with it. As her work continued to gain traction, Serena received an invitation to a prestigious event, the Southern Leadership Forum in Richmond, Virginia. The forum brought together leaders from various fields to discuss the future of the South, its culture, economy, and role in shaping national discourse. Serena was asked to deliver the closing keynote, a significant honor. The event was held at the historic Jefferson Hotel, a grand venue that exuded old-world charm. As Serena stood backstage, she felt a familiar mix of nerves and anticipation. This speech would be different from the ones she had given before. The audience was more diverse, a blend of corporate executives, educators, community leaders, and activists. Her words needed to resonate across a wide spectrum of experiences and perspectives. When her name was announced, Serena stepped onto the stage to a round of applause. She took a moment to scan the room, meeting the eyes of as many attendees as she could. Then she began. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her journey. "It's an honor to stand before you today in this city, a place steeped in history, both painful and profound. Richmond has been a symbol of struggle and transformation, much like the work we are all here to discuss." She paused, letting her words settle. "We are living in a time of reckoning. Across industries, institutions, and communities, people are asking hard questions about who we are and who we want to be. These questions are not easy to answer, but they are necessary, and the work of answering them starts with each of us." As she spoke, Serena wove together her own story with the broader themes of resilience, accountability, and hope. She challenged the audience to embrace discomfort, to confront their own biases, and to see leadership as a responsibility to lift others up. Leadership, she said in her closing remarks, is not about titles or accolades. It's about service. It's about the willingness to stand up, to speak out, and to act in the face of injustice. It's about creating a legacy that empowers those who come after us. and that is a legacy we all have the power to build. The room erupted in applause as Serena stepped away from the podium. Attendees rose to their feet, their claps reverberating through the grand hall. Serena felt a wave of emotion, gratitude, determination, and an unshakable sense of purpose. As the night wound down, Serena mingled with the crowd, engaging in thoughtful conversations and making connections with people who shared her vision for a more equitable future. By the time she returned to her hotel room, she felt a renewed sense of clarity. The work was far from finished, but she was exactly where she needed to be. Back in Atlanta, Serena found herself reflecting on the twists and turns of her journey. From the confrontation at the airport to the halls of Congress, she had faced challenges that tested her resolve and strengthened her spirit. She thought of the people she had met along the way, the young women inspired by her story, the allies who stood by her side, and the skeptics who had been swayed by her determination. Serena knew the road ahead would still be fraught with obstacles, but she welcomed the challenge. She had found her voice, and she wasn't about to let it go silent. A few days after returning to Atlanta, Serena was invited to an intimate roundtable discussion hosted by a prominent civil rights organization. The meeting, held in a restored Victorian mansion in the heart of Atlanta's Sweet Auburn district, was designed to bring together thought leaders from various industries to discuss how systemic barriers could be addressed collaboratively. The Sweet Auburn neighborhood, steeped in history and once known as the cradle of the civil rights movement, felt like the perfect backdrop for such a conversation. As Serena entered the room, she was greeted by familiar faces, activists, educators, corporate leaders, and community organizers. The air buzzed with anticipation as people exchanged handshakes and greetings, their conversations underscored by a shared sense of urgency. The discussion began with the moderator introducing the theme for the evening, from awareness to action, building a framework for lasting change. Serena listened intently as participants shared their perspectives, jotting down notes as ideas flowed. When it was her turn to speak, she leaned forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "I've spent my career in an institution where change is notoriously slow," she began. "But what I've learned is that progress doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires persistent effort, courageous leadership, and, most importantly, collaboration. No single person or group can dismantle systemic barriers alone. It takes all of us, working together, to create the future we want to see." Heads nodded around the room, and Serena continued, weaving in examples from her time in the military and her recent experiences with the task force. Her words resonated deeply, sparking a lively discussion that carried on late into the evening. By the time the meeting ended, Serena felt both invigorated and humbled. The exchange of ideas had been rich and productive, and she left the mansion with a renewed sense of purpose and a notebook filled with actionable strategies to explore. The following week, Serena received an invitation to deliver a guest lecture at Morehouse College, Spelman's brother institution. The topic, Leadership in the Face of Adversity. The invitation felt like coming full circle. Morehouse, like Spelman, was steeped in a legacy of cultivating leaders who changed the world, and Serena was eager to share her journey with its students. The lecture hall was packed when she arrived, students and faculty filling every seat and standing along the walls. As Serena took the stage, she felt a wave of nostalgia for her college days. The energy in the room was electric, a palpable hunger for inspiration and knowledge. "Leadership," she began, her voice carrying through the hall, "isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to ask the hard questions. It's about resilience, integrity, and the courage to stand firm in your convictions, even when the odds are stacked against you." She shared stories from her early days in the military, the lessons she'd learned from setbacks, and the pivotal moments that had shaped her perspective. She spoke candidly about the challenges she faced as a Black woman in a predominantly white, male-dominated institution, and the strategies she used to navigate those spaces without losing herself. The students hung on her every word, their faces reflecting a mix of admiration and determination. When she opened the floor for questions, a young man in the front row stood up, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Colonel Monroe," he said, "how do you keep going when it feels like the world is against you, when you're constantly fighting to prove yourself?" Serena paused, her gaze softening. "That's a powerful question," she said. "There have been times when I've felt like giving up, But what keeps me going is knowing that this fight isn't just about me. It's about the people who came before me, who paved the way so I could be here. And it's about the people who will come after me. Every step forward, no matter how small, makes a difference. And when you feel like the world is against you, remember, you are stronger than you think, and you are not alone. The applause that followed was thunderous, and Serena left the stage feeling deeply connected to the next generation of leaders. They were ready to take up the mantle, and she was honored to play a role in their journey. As Serena's work continued to gain momentum, so did the challenges. The pushback from some corners of the military grew louder, with critics accusing her of trying to fix something that wasn't broken. Others questioned whether her proposals would compromise the efficiency of the armed forces. One particularly scathing op-ed in a national newspaper argued that Serena's efforts were unnecessary social engineering and accused her of putting personal ambition above the good of the institution. The article stung, but Serena refused to be deterred. She knew the resistance was a sign that her work was making waves, and that change, no matter how necessary, was rarely welcomed without a fight. In response, Serena penned her own op-ed, addressing the misconceptions head-on. "Equity is not a threat. It's an opportunity," the piece was titled. In it, she outlined the tangible benefits of diversity and inclusion, backed by data and real-world examples. She also shared personal anecdotes, illustrating how her own journey had been shaped by the support of mentors and allies who believed in her potential. The piece went viral, sparking a national conversation about the intersection of leadership, equity, and institutional reform. Messages of support poured in, and Serena found herself more determined than ever to keep pushing forward. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and calls, Serena found herself back at Busy Bee Cafe, her unofficial sanctuary. As she waited for her order, she noticed a young woman sitting a few tables away, staring at her with wide eyes. The woman hesitated, then approached, clutching a notebook to her chest. "Excuse me, Colonel Monroe," she said nervously. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story, it's inspired me to go after things I never thought I could. I'm studying political science at Clark Atlanta, and one day, I hope to make a difference, just like you." Serena smiled, deeply moved. "What's your name?" "Jasmine," the young woman replied. "Well, Jasmine," Serena said, "the fact that you're here, working hard and dreaming big, means you're already making a difference. Keep going. The world needs your voice." They chatted briefly, and as Jasmine walked away, Serena felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Her journey, with all its ups and downs, was creating ripples that extended far beyond her immediate sphere. And in moments like this, she was reminded of why she had chosen this path. As the months rolled on, Serena's work began to bear fruit. Policies she had championed were implemented, and the culture within the military slowly started to shift. The road ahead was still long, but the progress was undeniable, and through it all, Serena remained grounded, her heart firmly rooted in the values that had guided her from the beginning: integrity, resilience, and the unwavering belief that change was not only possible, but essential. As she stood on her porch one evening, watching the Atlanta skyline shimmer in the distance, Serena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it, and she knew, without a doubt, that the best was yet to come. Months later, Serena found herself back in Washington, D.C. for a landmark event. The task force's final recommendations had been formally accepted by senior military leaders, and an official announcement was scheduled to be made at a press conference. The significance of the moment wasn't lost on her. Years of advocacy, meetings, and relentless determination had led to this milestone. The press conference was held in the Pentagon's press briefing room, the air thick with anticipation. Journalists, military personnel, and civil rights leaders filled the space, their murmurs creating a low hum of energy. Serena sat near the front, flanked by General Price and other members of the task force. When it was her turn to speak, she approached the podium with the same composure she had carried through every challenge. "Today is about progress," she began, her voice firm yet warm. "The recommendations we are announcing are not the end of the journey, they are the beginning. They are the foundation for a stronger, more inclusive military. A military that reflects the diversity of the nation it serves and recognizes that strength comes from unity, not division." She spoke about the policies they had developed, mentorship programs for underrepresented groups, bias training initiatives, and revised promotion criteria designed to level the playing field. She emphasized that these changes were not just about fairness, they were about ensuring the military remained a cutting-edge, cohesive force. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Serena stepped back, her heart full, but her mind already racing with thoughts of what still needed to be done. The journey ahead would be as challenging as the one behind her, but moments like this gave her hope. Back in Atlanta, Serena took some time to reflect and recharge. Her schedule had slowed slightly, allowing her to focus on smaller, community-oriented projects that brought her immense satisfaction. One of these was a mentorship program she had helped establish at Spelman College, aimed at preparing students for leadership roles in both civilian and military sectors. At the program's kickoff event, held in one of Spelman's elegant lecture halls, Serena addressed a group of bright-eyed young women. She could see pieces of herself in each of them, the same determination, the same hunger for change. Leadership isn't about perfection, she told them. It's about persistence. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. And it's about lifting others as you climb. Each of you has the potential to make an impact, and I'm here to tell you that the world is waiting for your contributions. After her speech, students lined up to speak with her, their questions ranging from career advice to personal challenges. Serena answered each one thoughtfully, her heart swelling with pride at their ambition and potential. One student, a senior named Olivia, lingered after the event. "Colonel Monroe," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking about applying to officer candidate school after graduation, but I'm not sure if I'm ready." Serena smiled warmly. "Olivia, none of us ever feel completely ready. But readiness isn't about knowing everything. It's about being willing to learn, grow, and adapt. If this is your dream, go for it. You'll surprise yourself with what you're capable of." Olivia beamed, her confidence visibly bolstered. "Thank you," she said. "I'll do it." As the seasons changed, Serena's work continued to expand in unexpected ways. She was invited to collaborate with corporate leaders on diversity initiatives, and her insights proved invaluable in shaping their strategies. Her ability to bridge the gap between different sectors made her a sought-after advisor, and her calendar quickly filled with meetings and speaking engagements. One particularly memorable invitation came from the city of Atlanta. They asked Serena to be the Grand Marshal of the city's annual Juneteenth parade, a celebration of Black history, resilience, and progress. The honor was deeply personal for Serena, and she accepted without hesitation. On the day of the parade, the streets of Atlanta were alive with music, laughter, and the vibrant energy of celebration. Serena rode in a convertible, waving to the crowds that lined the streets. Children pointed excitedly, parents smiled proudly, and elders nodded in approval. For Serena, the moment was a poignant reminder of why she fought so hard. For these people, for this community, for the generations that had come before, and the ones yet to come. As the parade wound its way through the city, Serena reflected on how far she had come. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had also been filled with triumphs, connections, and a profound sense of purpose. The culmination of Serena's journey came at a ceremony held at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. The event was organized to honor trailblazers in leadership and social justice, and Serena was among the honorees. The invitation alone had left her speechless, but standing on the stage that evening, she felt the magnitude of the moment. When her name was called, Serena approached the podium, her heart pounding. The audience, a mix of dignitaries, community leaders, and everyday citizens, waited in hushed anticipation. "I am deeply honored to be here tonight," she began, her voice steady. "This recognition is not just for me. It is for everyone who has stood by me, challenged me, and inspired me. It is for the people who have fought tirelessly for justice and equity, often without recognition or reward. And it is for the next generation who will carry this fight forward." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. Change is never easy, and progress is never guaranteed. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that every step forward matters. Every voice lifted, every barrier broken, it all adds up. Together, we can create a world that reflects the values we hold dear, and together, we will. The applause was deafening, and Serena felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. As she stepped away from the podium, she was met with hugs and congratulations from her peers, each one reinforcing the impact of her work. That night, as Serena sat alone in her hotel room, she allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection. The journey that had begun with a confrontation at an airport had taken her to unimaginable heights. She had faced resistance, doubt, and systemic barriers, but she had also found allies, inspired change, and discovered her own resilience. The road ahead was still long, but Serena was ready. She had built a legacy not just of personal success, but of empowerment and transformation. And she knew, deep in her heart, that her best work was yet to come. As she looked out at DC's skyline, the city lights twinkling in the distance, Serena smiled. She was exactly where she needed to be. As we reflect on this incredible story of resilience and courage, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more daily stories that inspire, challenge, and uplift. Hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you watching from? Let us know. We can't wait to connect with you.